The cost versus benefit, is that subjective? Or what's the most concrete evidence that says, yes, it is worth it?
Well, I would say a couple things. I think a big misconception about tagging is that it's the only tool available and that it is a scientific question of some sort. Like, I'm tagging, therefore I'm doing science.
Right.
That's not the case.
Right.
I think, it's like I'm building a house, so I use a hammer. You're not actually saying, you don't use, your job isn't hammering. Your job is building a house, and you use a variety of different tools, and the tool that you use is best for that job. And so, tagging is not a science; it's a tool used in specific questions. So I think it depends on the question. What we do know is that some type of information can be really important to conserve an animal. For example, the depth at which you asked me about fishing practices, and the depth at which your fish hooks are sitting can affect which species you catch. For example, if hammerheads are protected, but you use an indiscriminate fishing gear, you're going to be pretty ineffective. But if you know that hammerheads swim at a certain depth, have a preferred depth, and your fishing gear, you can adjust what depth that you fish at, then you can reduce your bycatch of hammerheads based on how you put out your gear. Or maybe if you know hammerheads are more at the surface at nighttime, then you might at night set lower, or in the daytime they're lower, then you might set higher. So you can adjust your fishing behavior. That's just one example. If
To break this down for people watching, that's an example of an individual or a company choosing to listen to that data and say, hey, we can target exactly what we want by going here, or we can avoid targeting X by going here. That's not necessarily a policy change.
No, but it can't. No. Managers can make a policy change. So, for example, right now, CITES says, we need to protect some regulation in place for hammerheads. So it's up to the countries, the jurisdictions, to put in a law that's going to have a positive impact. And I think this is something that most people don't realize, is how it works in the ocean, is that you can fish, you can harvest, unless the science shows otherwise. In most cases in the ocean, you're allowed to fish almost without any regulation for a specific species, unless the science shows that you can conserve that species by making a policy change. So the onus is actually upon the scientists to generate the science that can help conserve that species. You would think that the onus should be upon the fishermen. You would think that the onus should be upon the fishers to say, listen, I won't fish unless I can do it sustainably. But actually, it's the onus is upon the scientists to prove that you have the data to put a policy in place that makes it sustainable.
What's really interesting about that is that that's not actually the scientist's job. Scientist does not mean conservationist.
Correct. Like I said, the status quo continues in most cases, unless the scientists can actually, the burden on the scientists to show whether, their data is good enough to inform a policy change that can be useful.
What if your data is good enough and the policy change doesn't happen? That's what I get.
Well, that's a risk.
About.
And in most cases, especially here in the U.S., regulatory parties will ask what the public's opinion is, ask for comments before they put in a law. And I've been to meetings where you have people who are fishermen, you have people from the public, you have people from the scientific community, and arguing over whether to protect a species or not. And the fishermen are saying, "Where's your data? Where's your data showing that they're in trouble? Where's the data showing that you know where they go? Prove it. You might be saying, listen, I want to create this area as a marine protected area. They say, prove that it's going to work.
Well, I agree with you.
Otherwise,
it's better to have the data than not have it. But why don't they have to prove that they aren't causing ecological disaster?
I 100% agree.
And let's
That's
say
the problem. The problem is that the onus is on the science to show that it can be done to show that it can be done, and also in a sustainable way.
I mean, how many more oil spills have we had since the last disastrous one?
Too many.
I mean, I'm sorry, did someone put out a study that said that oil spill was good for the ecosystem?
Not to my knowledge.